Welcome to InFocus with Ejaz Haider. This program comes to you from the Center for Security, Strategy and Policy Research. A word about CESPA, it's an autonomous policy research center housed in the University of Lahore. And it tackles issues that impact contemporary security and strategic developments. This program is part of that effort. Now, today's program, unfortunately, is again about Gaza, which continues to be devastated by Israeli air raids and ground offensive. And the situation has become so horrific in terms of basic human survival, and the death toll is so alarming that the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres invoked Article 99 of the UN Charter. Now, this is a rarely invoked article, and it reads, and I quote from the article, "The Secretary General may bring to the attention of the Security Council any matter which, in his opinion, may threaten the maintenance of international peace and security." In his letter, the Secretary General urged the members of the Security Council to press to avert a humanitarian catastrophe and reiterated his appeal for a humanitarian ceasefire to be declared. "The healthcare system in Gaza is collapsing," he wrote, adding that there is no effective protection of civilians. "The current conditions are making it impossible for meaningful humanitarian operations to be conducted." This is as per the letter that he wrote. And he also pointed out that nowhere is safe in Gaza. Now, a similar warning was issued by Volker Turk, the UN human rights chief. He called the situation apocalyptic. And he also said the Gazans were living in utter, deepening horror with a high risk of atrocity crimes being committed. Now, according to the UN, the term atrocity crimes refers to the crimes of genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crimes as defined by international treaties. For his part, Israel's Foreign Minister Eli Cohen has lashed out at the UN Secretary General, calling for his resignation. The UN Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian Refugees itself has lost more than 100 aid workers, and over 30 have been wounded. According to the UN, more UN aid workers have been killed in Gaza than in any other single conflict in the organization's 78-year history. According to Financial Times military briefing report, Gaza now stands second only to Hamburg in terms of buildings destroyed, and the name will be listed with places like Cologne, Dresden, and Hamburg. Questions abound, which I shall place before today's panel of experts. I have with me Barbara Slavin, who's a distinguished fellow at the Stimson Center in Washington and a lecturer in international affairs at George Washington University. Ms. Slavin is an expert on Iranian and Middle Eastern affairs, author of 2 books on Iran, Bitter Friends, Bosom Enemies, Iran, the US, and the Twisted Path to Confrontation, and Time to Move from Tactics to Strategy on Iran. Ms. Slavin also has vast experience in reporting from the Middle East for various publications. With her is Dr. Avner Cohen, professor at the Nonproliferation and Terrorism Studies program at the Middlebury Institute of International Studies. A nuclear historian, Dr. Cohen is widely known for his path-breaking historical studies of the Israeli nuclear program. His most acclaimed book, Israel and the Bomb, was published by Columbia University Press in 1998. His last book, The Worst Kept Secret, Israel's Bargain with the Bomb, was published in 2010 by Columbia University Press. Now, let's get to the discussion here. And let me begin with Ms. Slavin here. Ms. Slavin, what is the end game here? And when I say end game, when Israel says it would destroy Hamas, what do you think that statement means?
Well, what we're seeing unfolding is a terrific tragedy for everyone in the Middle East, but most especially now the people of Gaza. I'm not sure Israel has an end game apart from killing as many members of Hamas, destroying as much Hamas infrastructure as possible. Unfortunately, that cannot be done without destroying Gaza and killing thousands of ordinary Palestinians, as we've seen. I have yet to see any indication that Israel has a strategy for how Gaza will be governed when this war, comes to a conclusion, if it comes to a conclusion. We've seen reports that Israel is planning to retain the right to go into Gaza whenever it wants, perhaps establish a buffer zone. And at the same time, Bibi Netanyahu, the prime minister of Israel, is expressing objections to having the Palestinian Authority take over control of Gaza from Hamas. Because he says that the leader of the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas, has not sufficiently condemned the atrocities that Hamas committed on October 7th. So I don't know where we're going apart from more suffering and death right now for the people of Gaza. And I don't see this as a solution, not in the short term or in the long term, for Israel or the Palestinian people.
Right. Now, this to me, as a minor student of military strategy and history, seems to me like a wish list. You want to do this, but whether it's doable has a big question mark on it. Now, the reason I say this is that, this Palestinian Authority thing, Palestinian Authority is extremely unpopular even in the occupied West Bank. And to think that it can go into Gaza atop Israeli Merkavas, if you will, and be accepted by the Gazans is just incredible. The other thing is Hamas is an idea. Now, I was watching the eminent Israeli historian, Ilan Pape, and he talked about the fact that, Israel is not a state. It's a project. It's a settler colonial project. Now, the issue with that is, and I'm not saying this is an Israeli saying that, and a number of other Israelis also say this. The problem with that is that if that is true, then we are headed towards mortal combat, because that renders the idea of two-state solution all but moribund, and it also does not allow a one-state solution where the Palestinians and the Jewish people can live together.
Yeah, well, there's a lot packed into that. I mean, if you look at the history of Israeli assassinations and policies against various terrorist groups that consider as terrorist, a group like Hamas, you can kill 10, 20 leaders, and there will be 10 or 20 more leaders that will emerge from the population. I think that this idea of destroying Hamas is frankly unrealistic, and I think Israel knows it, which means that what's going on now is collective punishment of the Palestinian people for the atrocities that Hamas committed on October 7th. This is a very difficult policy to defend long term. And even in the United States, which has long been very sympathetic to Israel, we've seen increasing opposition to the war, particularly among younger Americans who have no memory of an Israel before it became such a powerful country. So this is going to have to come to an end, and the sooner the better. I don't know how Israel will define a victory, but it's going to have to say that this has to stop. We have to focus on humanitarian relief initially for Palestinians, and then worry about how we can reconstruct some sort of governance for the Gaza Strip.
Right.
Let me add a few.
Let's get Professor Cohen. Yeah, Professor Cohen. Go ahead.
Very unfortunately, this is the tragedy of Israel that may have been the event that is the most tragic and the most difficult in the entire 75 years of Israel. I would start with the fact that Israel has never had the trauma as the one that it had on the day of October 7th. Never. Even the trauma of the 1973 war, 50 years of the day, essentially, on October 6, 1973, was, in historical outlook, was not as bad. It was not 1,200 or so people in one day. There was no 250 people kidnapped, mostly civilians. So to deal with that kind of national trauma at the height of 10 months of constant revolt against the legitimacy and the working of that particular government, which is not unrelated. Part of the tragedy is that this government is running Israel, dealing with this event, and Israel, unfortunately, does not have any effective political mechanism to remove that government, in particular, the one who ran that government. My own view, and I express it in writing and in talking, and unfortunately, there is no vehicle to move it, is that the present prime minister, the priority to remove the present prime minister is stronger even than running the war, because his obstacle to end the war and to run the war effectively in a way that would lead to some kind of consequences that would be instrument for the day after. I mean, essentially, he refused to discuss the day after. He has no ideas. He is looking for some kind of victory picture that allow him to end it. Most likely would be the killing or the finding or the of Hamas leaders there, either the leaders of the military wing, Mohammed Dev, or Yahya Sinwar, which may or may not happen. I do not think that the international community in the situation could continue with the situation as of now more than 10 days, maybe to Christmas maximum. So it will have to end. Ultimately, and within some time, it would lead to a new election in Israel. Bibi Netanyahu is now the most hated political leader in Israel. 70% of the people do not like him, do not want him to be in power. 35% want him now out. 35% want him to finish the war and to be gone. There is no clear picture how to do it. Election, he still have the majority because he was elected, he was elected a year plus ago, November last year. And it's a real problem. He will be removed, but the question is how. And the tragedy for right now, it's difficult to contain. I cannot say much more than, I agree with Barbara about the intensity and the scope of the tragedy. At the same time, most of the Israelis, by far the majority, including people at the center and many at the left, do believe that Israel must collapse the military capabilities of Hamas. The anger about what happened, the anger and the trauma, and dealing with the trauma, and dealing with the losing and the humiliation. Israel has never had that kind of humiliation. And the view in Israel, and I think it has some standing, is that Israel cannot find its own place in the region if it cannot repay back some of that humiliation, if it got get back some of its brand name that it lost. And that's what you see right now. The result is a tragedy.
But here's the thing, Professor Cohen. I'll just come to this issue of humiliation and trauma. But let me go back to your original point with reference to Netanyahu. Now, I was looking at some of the polls, not recent, this is about 4 weeks ago. And it was interesting that while there was a majority in favor of dealing with the Hamas problem, and so there was, this idea that there was a kind of solidarity there. The same sample rated Netanyahu extremely low. So it was interesting that while there was support for the war in some ways, there was no support for Netanyahu.
That's fair.
The other issue that happened, this war cabinet, now there is a clear, growing differences between Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant to the point where they had to address a joint press conference, and Gallant did not show up for that. And then Netanyahu went ahead and said, and all of this is on record, saying that this was a joint press conference, but he did not come for whatever reason he joined. So my point is that this is a war cabinet that's supposed to be on the same page if you will, cliched though that this phrase is. But we see these growing differences. Gallant also has growing differences with people like Ben-Gvir. And Ben-Gvir and Smotrich and the rest of those who are in favor of the illegal settlements are now clearly pushing back. So this seems like a situation which is not really conducive to finding the end game or even devising a clear strategy. On top of that, some of the comments that I've heard from Israelis themselves have to do with the fact that Netanyahu wants to drag this on because he realizes that the day the war ends, his political career will be finished. So I just want to get your take on this.
I fully agree with your analysis. Netanyahu has been doing certain political moves, including the fact that he does not agree essentially with anybody to be there, including the PA, the Palestinian Authority, as a payment to keep his 64 majority in the Knesset, which includes Smotrich and Ben-Gvir. In doing so, he has become a real obstacle for any movement for the day after. That's why it's become a necessity to remove him. I think that the Biden administration that already has some impact on managing the war and putting some restraints, not maybe substantial, but some restraint. The fact is that the other day they were able to force that some 120,000, I think it's liters of oil has to come to the Gaza Strip. Smotrich and Ben-Gvir did not want it, but it was essentially imposed on them. I think they have to take a much more coercive and active policy. Jack Sullivan is about to reach the area in the coming days, and my understanding he's going to be much more involved. I just don't think that there is much more engine, much more steam to run beyond. As I said, I think whatever Gallant says about, we need months to work out and to root out all the Hamas, they don't have that kind of time. The fear of a real catastrophe in the sense of disease spreading in a way that will be uncontrolled is a real one. It's not there yet, but it's a real one. Full chaos. I mean, there is some elements of chaos. It's not yet completely. It's those risks are real ones, and I think the United States must take much more active actions in navigating this conflict. Right. It's difficult. It's difficult for Biden. He doesn't have the personality to do it. He has a natural inclination to be nice to Israel. It's the Israel you remember from his meeting with Golda Meir some 50 years ago. But I think the United States is the only power. I mean, whatever the United Nations says, it has no teeth. Right. If anybody can put some limits to this war, and it must stop very, very soon, it's the United States.
I'm going to now pick up on what Professor Cohen said about trauma and humiliation. Now, since we do not have a Palestinian representative on this panel, and since I'm moderating, I'm going to carry that to Ms. Slavin, and with a certain sort of background to this. Now, while I perfectly understand what happened on October 7th. And how traumatic it would be for the Israelis. These humiliations and these traumas, just forget about Gaza. Let's talk pre-October 7 of occupied West Bank and East Jerusalem. With the control structures and slow structured violence against Palestinians, where the age of criminality is 12 years, where there are roadblocks and checkpoints, scattered in a way within the heart of even the areas B and of course C is completely under the Israeli control, and this has been going on. I mean, this is even after Oslo II. I'm not even going back to what Yitzhak Rabin said just a month before he was assassinated, what he said in the Knesset, which has to do with the fact that he said that this is not going to be a state. And, I can actually pull out his exact words in the Knesset. So my point really is that this is a reaction. I mean, I had Daniel Levy on the very, very program on which you're appearing. And he said to me very clearly, I mean, he's an Israeli. He was an Israeli negotiator. He said to me, people think that the history began on October 7. It did not.
Yeah.
So we have to balance or juxtapose the trauma of October 7 and that humiliation with decades of traumas and humiliations faced by the Palestinians.
Yeah. No,
I'll come back to I'll come back to you, Professor Cohen, but I just wanted to get the Slavin.
Yeah. No, of course, and I've just been reading Rashid Holidy's excellent book, The 100 Years War on Palestine, which, for those who haven't, I mean, the Palestinians have been on the losing side of this conflict for a very long time and have suffered enormous trauma and so on. But I think, and Avner understands this better, obviously, that the bargain that the Israeli state makes with its citizens is that we're going to protect you. You're going to be, okay, there'll be terrorism from time to time, but, you're safe within the bounds of Israel. And we're going to go after your enemies outside and, quote unquote, mow the grass so that they can never, really attack you in a massive way. And we have never seen anything like October 7th in terms of the numbers of people killed, the kinds of people killed, young people at a concert. And I think, it makes me think a little of the nuclear issue, which of course is something Avner and I have worked on together. The reason Israel is so obsessed with an Iranian nuclear bomb, or used to be anyway, was the idea that it would make Israel not a safe place for Jews to live. And it was supposed to be the sanctuary for people of the Jewish faith around the world who felt discriminated against or mistreated in some way. So what Hamas did, more than any Iranian bomb, frankly, because as we know, Israel has nuclear weapons. What Hamas did in one day was destroy the myth that Jews are safe in Israel. And that goes to the whole raison d'etre for the state of Israel, born in the aftermath of the Holocaust. So I think that people around the world have to understand that this is, as Avner said, it's a unique trauma. It's a unique defeat.
No, I agree with you. I agree with you. I was reading.
To my mind, it doesn't justify the brutality against the Palestinian people that we see going on now. But it has to be.
What I'm saying is that when you have this kind of hegemonic control, then it will beget a reaction. Now, I read Professor Cohen's piece in Foreign Policy, and where he talked about the 3 lines of defense. All 3 lines of defense were breached by Hamas fighters.
Yeah.
Now, my point is that no matter how many, because this is not the first time there's been a war in Gaza. I mean, this is like what, 4th or 5th iteration.
Yeah, but the scale is just so much worse.
Never before to that extent. And that's
correct. But here's my point. My point is that with every iteration, we have seen that Hamas's capabilities have improved. If we, analogically speaking, what happened in Sabra and Shatila, for instance, it gave birth to Hezbollah. Hezbollah's 2006 showing against IDF was way in terms of capabilities, to the point where Israel then had to go for that Vinograd Commission and to see why things happened the way they did. And they tried to then improve the IDF's capabilities against against Hezbollah. But my point is, today Hezbollah's capability from 2006 is at least 10 times more. I mean, this is something that the Israeli defense minister himself has spoken about. So my point is that as these technologies diffuse horizontally, these capabilities will improve. And therefore, I think there is a need, and frankly, I don't know how that's going to come about. And I think Professor Cohen should be able to tell me that, because he's an Israeli, that there has to be some kind of solution where two sets of people can live together peacefully. Professor Cohen.
Let me. I mean, it is a tragedy, and let me put the other side, in addition to what Barbara said so eloquently, which I was about to say too. It happened after about roughly 15 years, since 2007, that Benjamin Netanyahu, 2008, took over from Ehud Olmert, the reins in office. And it was a constant way to clash, essentially, the Palestinian wish for national fulfillment. And he was able to do it rather successfully, not just in Israel itself, that he was dismiss the Palestinian cause. He allows many, many Israelis to forget, as if there is a Palestinian issue, as if Israel has something out there, but it can manage life without problems. Netanyahu, just before this calamity happened on October 7th, was on the verge of creating normalization, for all practical purposes, peace relationship with Saudi Arabia, the final and the last part. And even the Saudi Arabians were ready to give only tiny little lip service to the Palestinians. In other words, the forgetfulness of the Palestinian cause and this illusion as if you can manage the conflict, to leave it aside and to continue and to create to expand peace to the Gulf, to Saudi Arabia, to others, as if the Palestinian issue does not exist, was not only something that in the last nearly 15 years was able to be planted in the minds of Israeli, but many American and even even people of the region, Saudi Arabians, were ready to go along with it. So part of this fault is not only on the Israelis. It is a tragedy, and there is no way to forget the Palestinian issue. It must be dealt with in a serious manner, in a respectful way. First and foremost, I think Israel needs to have a new government, and that will take some time. I don't think that Netanyahu would leave, even though most Israelis would want to see him to leave. And as I said, unfortunately, there is no good constitutional instrument to remove him very, very fast, as the country needs. It needs its Bentley. What to do now? I hope that the United States would stop it. I hope that some kind of picture of ending will be found. I think the Hamas already, as a military organization, is nearly gone. I mean, the Hamas as an idea is there, but as an organization is already gone. What happened on October 7th is not going to happen again, and we need to work out. And Israel must understand that the Palestinian issue must be dealt with. And I think this realization is a very, very strong one. Even though among many, many Israelis, it's only giving the atrocities, and Barbara described it fairly, but it was more than that. I mean, the fact that heads were beheaded, women were raped in some cases. I mean, the level of atrocity Israel has never known since the Holocaust. It never happened in one single day, even the War of Independence, when Israel was many, many times weaker. So there is a national trauma that the country must deal with, and it's being manipulated.
But Professor Cohen, I had the good opportunity in the last 7 or 8 years of his life to know Bob McNamara. We used to be on the pug watch circuit together. And I saw the documentary that Errol Morris made on Robert Strange McNamara. The Fog of War, 11 lessons from the life of Robert Strange McNamara. And the first lesson is empathize with the enemy. The problem is that, and I understand you're an Israeli, I'm a Pakistani, I would also stand up for my state, is to try and empathize with the other set of people. We can go into history, but I just want to give you one small insight that Muhammad Hakel, the late Muhammad Hakel, wrote in his book, The Illusion of Triumph. Let me read that out to you. It says the second message was a 4-page letter from Shamir. It's talking about Yitzhak Shamir. And this is to the King of Morocco. Your Majesty, the image given of me in the Arab press is that I'm very hard. It's not true. Shamir said he had lived through the agonies of the pogroms and that friends and relatives of his had been caught up in the Holocaust. He understood the suffering of others. And then he went on to say, I have lived my life dreaming of a nation and a state, so I can understand the Palestinians. If you are angry over what we are doing to face the Palestinian uprising, it is not that we do not understand. We understand their dreams very well. But unfortunately, here we have a conflict between two dreams. We agree to the Palestinians having a dream, but they should understand that it is impossible. So my point really is, and there are a number, one can go to Menachem Begin's. Once a reporter asked him what the borders of Israel were, and he said that they're all given in the Bible. And so this whole idea of Eretz Yisrael is something that is like a motif, and it keeps coming up constantly. We have hundreds of illegal settlements in occupied West Bank. Organizations like Mahsom Watch, B'Tselem, Breaking the Silence, Jewish Voice for Peace. Tamar Yoram, who did her IDF stint, went on to make a documentary, To See If I'm Smiling, where she had 6 IDF women speak out of their experiences about how they exercise power in the occupied West Bank. So the issue really is that before we find, this can be an episode, but in order for us to actually find a solution, both sides would need to empathize with each other. And I, frankly, the onus of responsibility for that is on Israel, because it is the much stronger power in that territory. I would like to get your view, Professor Cohen, or also
I fully agree with you. The human perspective for making that kind of approach and being able to sympathize and to give the sense of humanity to the other is not at a time when you yourself is being humiliated. And that's why for the time being, after that kind of humiliation,
right, I get
that's
that,
not the time that
pre-October 7, in the occupied West Bank, 200 Palestinians had been killed. There was no Hamas attack.
Mm-hmm.
Over 1,000 were detained. The age of criminality in occupied West Bank is 12 years. And right now, okay, you're bombing Gaza, fine. But look at what's happening in the occupied West. There's no Hamas there.
Well, there is. There is Hamas there. Unfortunately, Hamas
we are in much agreement.
There is an 8-year-old. There is an 8-year-old, and this is a clip that everyone has played, who's playing in the street. A 15-year-old comes to drag his body, gets shot. To think that they are Hamas fighters is a bit of a stretch for, I would say, even an Israeli.
Yeah. Look, the U.S. government has a responsibility not only to end this war, but to really seriously take upon itself the overall question of governance of Palestinian areas and whether a 2-state solution is still possible. The Biden administration made a mistake. It picked up the Abraham Accords policy of the Trump administration and ran with it, as Avner said, talked about, bringing Saudi Arabia into this without dealing with the Palestinian question. And we now know that's impossible, and that there has to be some structure for the Palestinians to exercise self-rule and to have some dignity and sovereignty and some protection against Israeli settlers. So that has to be taken on as a very top priority.
But, two illegal Israeli settlers are part of the cabinet, not the war cabinet, but
no, I agree. I agree. Regime change is necessary on both sides.
The life of this cabinet is short.
Yeah,
but I want to. I want
it's still going to be there.
I want to, get Professor Cohen on another issue. So we have already seen horizontal escalation. We've got Hezbollah, although Hezbollah has not taken on Israel in terms of long-range rocketry, but they've been engaging the IDF on Israel's northern border. We've also seen the Houthis, doing whatever they can in terms of raising the cost of shipping through the Mediterranean and the Red Sea. Do you believe that if it goes south, and let me also add that Egypt and Jordan have given the US their red line, which is that no refugees from either the occupied West Bank or Gaza. Now, if this begins to go south, what are your greatest fears, Professor Cohen?
Well, one thing that needs to be taken into the equation, and part of the explanation of the Israeli ferocity of using force in Gaza is the realization that the need to prevent hostilities and the need to create diplomatic solution in the north, along the 1701 Security Council resolution, to have some kind of way to reach agreement that Hezbollah would remove their forces north of the Litani River in a manner that would be non-violent, depends very much in the having some kind of military clarity about the devastation that's going on in the south. It's unfortunate to some extent, but it has a certain kind of logic of war. And I think the Israeli preference is very much to get, 150,000 Israeli residents of the northern area, people who live up to 7 kilometers from the northern border, have become also refugees in their own country. They are not ready to come back until the Hezbollah forces are removed back to the north. North of the Litani River,
which is unlikely to happen because
it's not
Hezbollah
clear. It's not clear. There is some overall discussion with the United States, with France, with elements from Lebanon itself about overall, complex changes in Lebanon, not just the whole structure in Lebanon that would allow Hezbollah to remove its forces to the north. But part of it will be the determination of the people of Lebanon that do not want to see Gaza in their own territory. And I think Hezbollah is learning to understand that. So the way that's going on in Gaza also has some impact on what's would happen.
Okay, so I take it that you think that this horizontal escalation is not going to escalate vertically.
I hope so. It's difficult to say.
As far as the northern. Oh, one other point before I go to Ms. Slavin and then I close this program. There have been some really irresponsible statements. One by the Heritage Minister, Amihai Eliyahu, who talked about using the nuclear option. Then Telly Gottlieb, who's a Likud Knesset member and a lawyer, she also talked about using whatever means possible. And Eliyahu later said, well, whatever I said was basically metaphorical. Now, the thing is that we have seen this, and I just want to cast it in a broader context, if you allow me. We also saw these statements within the context of Russo-Ukraine war from the Russian side. Overall, we have seen that the international arms control, regime is kind of unraveling. I actually did a program on that, and things don't look good at all. And of course, as you know, having written your book on Israeli nuclear capability and the uniqueness of it in terms of being there and not being there kind of a thing. How do you look at these statements? And I know, I mean, in your foreign policy article, you mentioned that Netanyahu had given a charge to one of his political appointees, which I take it you're not particularly happy with.
Well, it's anecdotal, but it does give some sense that Israel policy of opacity is not as strong as it used to be. The sense of inhibition and prohibition, that nobody talk about this sacred issue, keep it completely apart for everything else, is eroding. And that's the fact. I'm kind of amazed by your detailed knowledge of the all these minutiae of the Israeli politics. You mentioned Gottlieb and you mentioned Avichai. None of them is significant figure in Israeli politics, but they play some kind of role. It's anecdotal evidence. It's idiotic, but yes, it gives a sense where people, and it gives a sense also of the trauma that happened. I mean, nobody takes seriously, and they're not members in any body of policymaking on these issues. But people talk, and Netanyahu does not even fire them. Avichai, in any normal government, should be fired immediately within 24 hours after what he said, even though he has no any responsibility on this matter whatsoever. Yeah.
Well, as far as the minutiae is concerned, thanks for the compliment. But as they say in the military, time spent on reconnaissance is never wasted. So if you really want to tackle a subject, then you've got to know what you're talking about.
You do. You certainly do.
No. Thank you so much. Ms. Slavin, some final thoughts. Also, I mean, Professor Cohen talked about Hezbollah. I want to get your take on Hezbollah also. And of course, Iran.
Sure. Bibi Netanyahu also had a comment at the UN where he kind of talked about a nuclear deterrent, if I'm not mistaken. He also slipped.
He was slipped.
So yeah, the policy of that Avner Cohen has written about of opacity is, I think, long gone. Look, Iran. This whole crisis came at an awkward moment for the Iranians. They had just reestablished relations with the Saudis. Their economy is in terrible condition, and we just put a piece up on our Middle East Voices blog from a contributor inside Iran about just how bad the economic situation is in Iran now. They cannot afford a wider war. It's the last thing they can afford, and so I think they're acting to restrain Hezbollah. Hezbollah also can't because of the situation in Lebanon. Lebanon can't afford a wider war. The Houthis are extremely irresponsible. I think they were feeling neglected, and they wanted to have a little attention and have the world look at them, as somehow a potent actor. They're 1,000 miles away from Gaza. It's ridiculous. But we also have had some articles about why the Houthis are doing what they're doing. It's symbolic. It's not serious. So that's the good news, that hopefully, and the shorter this war can be, the less the opportunity for a catastrophic mistake that would widen it. It's another reason why this has to come to an end. I agree with what Avner said that Hamas has suffered serious blows. It will be a long time for it to recover. It won't be destroyed, but it has been, at least for now, I think, contained and has suffered a lot. But we have to bring an end to it, and we have to start thinking about a political prospect that goes beyond. One other point about the Israeli nuclear program. If we ever want to solve the problem of the Iranian nuclear program and really seriously prevent proliferation in the Middle East, then Israel has to come clean about what it has. And it has to reach an agreement with the IAEA. It has to go under safeguards of some sort. It's enough double standards, I think, when it comes to the nuclear question as well as all the other ones we've discussed.
And in many ways, Iran imitates and mirrors what Israel has been doing a while ago. I think in many ways, Iran becoming a threshold nuclear weapon states, very much like Israel did it in the late 60s. It's kind of interesting to see how to follow the Israeli pattern.
I was actually going to say that because I think, from where I stand, this whole idea of the Iranian nuclear program is like closing the stable door after the horse has bolted. So I think that's something which is,
it's playing
which can't really be done, frankly.
It's getting closer and closer to the threshold. Israel was hours from having a full assembled weapons. Iran is now maybe days or a few weeks. But it's
and given Iran's very advanced missile capability, it's not something that you use for tactical warheads. So I think that issue has already been. But I completely agree. I think Professor Cohen has put it brilliantly that it's the same template as the Israeli template with reference to the nuclear capability. Let's hope that this issue is resolved as quickly as possible. I believe America has already refused that additional aid that was supposed to go to Israel. So that might just be the beginning of something more serious.
That has to do with the U.S. Congress, which has its own priorities, I'm afraid.
Yes.
We will see.
Yeah, but reining Israel in. I'm also not
dysfunctioning. There is a lot of dysfunctioning.
Yeah, I'm also not very sure, frankly, about how much Hamas's capability has been destroyed, because you might want to go back and look at the clips. The last 3 exchanges of hostages, they actually happened in the south of Gaza City, and those hostages actually crossed from the Karni crossing point, which to me was like a signal from Hamas that they still control this area. But thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Professor Cohen. Thank you, Ms. Slavin, for being on the program. I'm really grateful. Please that you could give your point of view. Obviously, there are lots of controversial issues here. But before I sign off, let me present some evidence in relation to Israel's deliberate bombing of what they call power targets, i.e. tall buildings, as also residential areas. Now, deterrence is a central pillar of Israeli military policy. Since the 2006 Lebanon war, deterrence is embodied in the so-called Dahiya Doctrine. Now, this doctrine has 2 pillars: use of overwhelming and disproportionate force and targeting of government and civilian infrastructure during military operations. Dahiya, incidentally, is the name of a Beirut district, a Hezbollah stronghold. And this district was nearly completely destroyed by Israel during its invasion of Lebanon in the summer of 2006. In October 2008, Gabi Seboni, the director of Military and Strategic Affairs program at Tel Aviv University's Institute for National Security Studies, it's a quasi-governmental think tank with close ties to the Israeli political and military establishment. He published a policy paper which was titled Disproportionate Force: Israel's Concept of Response in Light of the Second Lebanon War. Now, let me just give you an excerpt from this. With an outbreak of hostilities with Hezbollah, the IDF, which is the Israel Defense Forces, will need to act immediately, decisively, and with force that is disproportionate to the enemy's actions and the threat it poses. Such a response aims at inflicting damage and meting out punishment to an extent that will demand long and expensive reconstruction processes. Israel's test will be the intensity and quality of its response to incidents on the Lebanese border or terrorist attacks involving Hezbollah in the north or Hamas in the south. In such cases, Israel again will not be able to limit its response to actions whose severity is seemingly proportionate to an isolated incident. Rather, it will have to respond disproportionately in order to make it abundantly clear that the state of Israel will accept no attempt to disrupt the calm currently prevailing along its borders. Israel must be prepared for deterioration and escalation, as well as for a full-scale confrontation. Such preparedness is obligatory in order to prevent long-term attrition. Now, this is an excerpt from that paper. In another analysis piece, which was also published in October 2008 and was titled IDF Plans to Use Disproportionate Force in the Next War, military correspondent Amos Harel, who writes for Israel's Haaretz newspaper, quoted a senior Israeli general, Gadi Eisenkot, who was then commander of Israeli forces in the north, and who described the Dahiya Doctrine as applied to a future war with Lebanon. Now, let me tell you that Gadi Eisenkot later became the IDF chief, and he is currently part of the war cabinet. Now, what did he say? He said, we will wield disproportionate power against every village from which shots are fired on Israel and cause immense damage and destruction. From our perspective, these are military bases. This isn't a suggestion. This is a plan that has already been authorized. It should be clear, and now that we've witnessed what's going on, and given Israeli bombing of Gaza since October 8, that Israel is applying the Dahiya Doctrine to one of the most densely populated areas in the world. The US and its Western allies know this. If they have still continued to supply artillery shells and ground attack munitions to Israel, it is because they are complicit in the ongoing atrocities. This is all from this episode. If you like the discussion, click on the subscribe button. That helps us bring you quality discussions. Until our next episode, goodbye and stay safe.